drawing the living faces of people who are present with us still. And not only are they not lost in history, but they are present to us in a very, very specific context, the context of the liturgy, the worship of God, our Heavenly Father, by the whole company of heaven and the whole company of the church here on earth. They are our companions, are not just our inspiration from the past, but people who through their prayers aid us and support us. And when we attend the liturgy, we are entering into their presence because the saints are continually praising God. It's a mystical thing. It's difficult to get our heads around exactly what that means because it's a world to come, a world that we don't yet participate in directly or fully. But we have a foretaste of it when we're celebrating the Divine Liturgy or the Holy Mass, the Eucharist, whichever we call it. And the saints are those who belong officially to that context. We actually say they've been raised to the altars, which is an official ceremony presided over by a bishop or quite often the Pope, proclaiming someone to be absolutely reliably in heaven, in the presence of God, and able to intercede for us. A gift from heaven to earth that the church is able to celebrate. And the place where that happens is the Eucharist. So we're talking about Eucharistic people. That's who the saints are. It's not just an individual that I like. It's somebody who belongs to the church in a very particular way. So we are painting icons of people who are official participants in the church's liturgy here on earth, not just in heaven, but here on earth. So when we paint these icons to be essentially making visible in the context of the liturgy these living people, we're serving the church in a very, very particular way. So the way in which they are dressed, the posture that they are given, the way in which they are painted should echo that context. The saints should be presented for the occasion of the liturgy. Saints from many centuries ago often have many examples of icons that we can work from, but with many modern saints we have a double problem. One, quite often in a Latin context, in a Western church context, there aren't icons, or what there are rather poor. And we have a problem which is also true for Orthodox saints, modern Orthodox saints, is that we can have film or certainly photographic evidence to work from, and people are aware of how they look. So when we paint an icon in this transfigured style, where we're taking out the sensuality, when we're not trying to get a pietistical likeness, but this ascetical likeness, this ascetical style of iconography, it can be quite a challenge because they need to be recognizable. That's the whole point. And certainly throughout the history of the church, when people have been painting icons of saints, when people have known their likeness, they have felt duty-bound to make sure that their icons reflect that. And we can think, say, for example, of St Peter and St Paul, two very distinct likenesses, consistent from the very earliest centuries all the way through to today. So creating a likeness rather than just a general appearance, when we can do it, is really crucial and important. And the idea that sort of, all icons sort of should look the same is fanciful. Of course they're supposed to be a recognizable likeness, and so that we know exactly who it is that we are in the presence of with a particular icon. That's why we put the name on it. It's very, very important that it is a likeness of the saint, not just some fanciful, imaginative creation from the artist. Now, sometimes the tradition doesn't give us many examples or any examples. So, for example, you might have a saint, say, like St Carlo Acutis, who's just been canonized, beatified. And what do you do about creating an icon? How do we go about that? Well, that's where I think this process of doing this icon for St John Vianney will be quite helpful in exploring that process. And that's what I'm sharing with you during this course. So we're not going to have session by session, paint this, paint that, paint the other, paint, and demonstrate absolutely everything. Rather, what I'm going to do is try and extract the essentials so that you can understand the process. I'm assuming that you've got a certain amount of experience. So you know how to mix egg tempera, you know how egg tempera works. You know the basics of iconography in terms of the ascetical style. If you don't know that, then you can refer to earlier courses like Our Lady of Sorrows, which is free, to fill in on that background. But this is building on that and is especially designed for people who are wanting to engage with the challenge of a new icon, especially in a Western context, and adapting the Byzantine style to that. So, when we start trying to capture this likeness, we need to know what the person is like. And that isn't something that just comes from looking at a photograph. When somebody does a portrait of a living person, they'll do some sittings, and it's different than doing it from a photograph. It's about engaging with what makes that person unique. When it comes to painting icons of saints, we should engage in the same process. So the first thing is to spend time in a relationship with this saint. When I was doing this icon, I was looking at writings about the saint, listening to some of his homilies, getting a sense of how he was seen by his contemporaries, listening to audio books from soon after his death. This was really important, as well as digging through historical resources, looking at Wikipedia, for example, or Catholic encyclopedias, for summaries of the saint's life, the biographical details, putting him in a context. So when it comes to St John Vianney, he was somebody who was a child during the French Revolution. He grew up having to choose the faith at a time when priests were being massacred, monasteries closed, the church was in disarray. That was his childhood. He came from a very poor family, from a peasant family. He was a shepherd. He wasn't able to get an education until much later. And then when he was getting his education in seminary, he was much older than the other students, and he had tremendous difficulty mastering formal lessons, and especially Latin. In fact, his Latin was so bad that he was dismissed from the seminary for a while before returning and completing his studies. All of this helps you to live in the presence of this saint and to get a sense of how his love for the Lord came to birth. And that background roots the design process. It's very important that you don't skimp that. You use the prayers from the church's liturgy that address the saint. You see the way in which he's played a role in the life of the church. So, for example, St John Vianney was very soon declared to be a saint, beginning of the 20th century. He then was made patron saint of parish priests because of the exemplary work that he'd done at a time when the parish system in France was completely broken, And he single-handedly took this little village at the back of nowhere and made it a centre of Christian life and charity, helping people to discover the joy of Christian living, what it meant to be part of a Christian community where people practiced virtue, not to sort of tick off lists, but so that the community could live with fidelity to Jesus in love for one another. He was a gentle pastor. He was somebody who had the courage to call people to conversion, to make time for virtue, but virtue as a way of creating joy and happiness for people, real, lasting, enduring joy and happiness in their family life, in the simple goodness of life, goodness of being alive. He would be exemplary in his generosity, sharing what he owned. I mean, people would provide for him because he lived in sort of quite abject poverty. But he was in abject poverty not out of some sort of ascetical quest, but basically out of a generosity of heart. He would just give and give and give to his parishioners, to the poor who passed by, to the literally thousands of people who come asking for his advice, especially in the confessional. And this generosity of spirit is something which was seen as exemplary for parish priests. So this is the part of his personality that becomes part of the church's liturgical life, the way in which the church celebrates his gift. And then Pope Benedict XVI recently declared him to be the patron saint of all priests. Pope Benedict wrote a letter to priests in the Jubilee year, and it explores a little of the vision that Pope Benedict had about St John Vianney. He said, "Let us ask the Lord to set the heart of every priest afire with that pastoral charity which can make him one in heart and mind with Jesus the High Priest, and thus to imitate Jesus in complete self-giving." And he makes a quotation from St John Vianney. "A good shepherd, a pastor after God's heart, is the greatest treasure which the good Lord can grant to a parish, and one of the most precious gifts of divine mercy. The priesthood is the love of the heart of Jesus." Were we to realise fully what a priest is on earth, we would die, not of fright, but of love. Without the priest, the passion and death of our Lord would be of no avail. It is the priest who continues the work of redemption on earth. What use would a house filled with gold be were there no one to open the door? The priest holds the key to the treasures of heaven. It is he who opens the door. He is the steward of the good Lord, the administrator of his goods. This is the vision that the Church holds before every priest in the person of St John Vianney. So take time to read through some of those resources. Dig, see where the Lord leads you. Make it a prayerful pilgrimage in the company of St John Vianney. Listen, discern, be silent, sit before the sources. Take yourself before the Blessed Sacrament or into a quiet place where you can be close to the Lord, and try to enter into the divine company that exists between this saint and Christ himself. That's true to do for any icon you do of anybody, even if it's you're doing basically a copy of an existing icon. You don't want it to be a dead copying. You want it to be an inspired reflection of a living person who lives, dwells, embodies, communicates God himself. When it comes to St John Vianney, I sort of noted down some of the things which struck me, what resonated with me as I was digging through all this material, because there's so much, you can't include all of it. So it's important just to sort of note things down. So one of the things that, some of the things that struck me, first of all, this thing about the priest, and the priest at Mass. The Mass is the culmination of everything. And what you might call the fulcrum of the grandeur of the priest's identity. John Marie Vianney, very humble, very, very humble, but therefore free to be completely mesmerised by the wonder of the priesthood that had been entrusted to him, to which he had been raised. So a sense of the wonder of the Mass, a sense of the wonder of the priest, the joy and light-filled person who's standing at the fulcrum between heaven and earth. So that's the first thing. And quite often in the Western Church, John Marie Vianney is shown ready to hear confessions, so in a surplice and a stole. But that charism of being a great confessor, and he was extraordinary. I mean, thousands of people coming. He would spend 16 hours a day sometimes in the confessional continuously. Now, that is extraordinary. That was a very particular charism that was entrusted to him for the particular work that God wanted him to do within the priesthood. But it won't be the defining charism as it is for some. But the celebration of Mass is something that is absolutely at the core of that priestly identity, regardless of what charisms you're given to explore it or express it. The essence, the summit, the foundation of the priestly life is the celebration of Mass. So when I was thinking about this design, I thought, no, I don't want to show him as the confessor. I want to show him in the fullness of what it means to be a priest. It means dressed as a priest. It means offering everything in and through that priestly office. So I decided that I would show him in priestly vestments and with his hands open in the gesture of offering. And a priest, not just offering the bread and wine that becomes Christ's body and blood, but as all humans do, offering all of creation to our Heavenly Father. We become the pinnacle of the created order that is able to bring everything of the glory of God that is found in all things and express that in this great act of giving thanks, which culminates in the offering of the Mass, which is the offering of Christ himself on Calvary. So it seemed to me I wanted to capture something of that. So the standing figure, hands open as he would if he was standing offering the Eucharist, dressed in his priestly garment of the chasuble and alb. The second thing that struck me was the seminary context. Now, as well as getting involved in the life of the saint, with a particular commission where it's going to a particular community, it's important to understand the relationship between the saint and that community or person. Now, this icon was a commission for a Catholic seminary. So this is an example, the parish patron saint of all priests, for a community of people trying to discern a vocation, whether or not they have a vocation as a priest, and to be an inspiration once they become priests. The seminary is the place where their formation literally is taking place, and St John Marie Vianney being the active patron of that seminary. It's dedicated to him, entrusted to him. So you've got lots of resonances going on here. And I think when I'm trying to design an icon, what I'm not trying to do is pack it with symbols. What I'm trying to do is to have resonance where all the things that seem important about this saint are sort of echoing with each other. So there's a unity, there's an energy, it's a living context which you're drawing people in and which is giving itself to the person. So you get a living connection. It's not about something that happens in somebody's head and say, oh, this means that and this means the other and this means something else, as though it's a sort of visual dictionary. You do have things in there which have very specific meanings, but you're not trying to create something that's so tight. It's something that's alive and living and resonance, like a bell resonates, it chimes, the music hits your ear, it moves you. And so in the same way, when we're composing our icon, and composing is a nice word, isn't it? Resonates with the idea of music, and music is all about resonating. So when you're composing an icon, you're trying to find resonances, one within another and another. And so the idea of the patron, the saint who was a priest, who became the patron saint of parish priests, who became the patron of all priests, who is the patron of a place where people are trying to discern a vocation to become priests, to think of that context where people will return in years to come because it's where they received that formation in their priestly identity. So it's something that's going to resonate with them in their life ahead, in their priestly work, in their work as parish priests, etc., etc. It's seeing all of those resonances and finding imagery which will articulate that or embody that or root that in this particular design. So that's what I'm trying to do. That's what I'm trying to sense. Another resonance that came to me was really thinking about, the priests who will be formed and go forth, is the idea of the pastor of the pastors. Who looks after those priests? Who's shepherding them? Who's putting a fatherly arm around them? Who is giving them encouragement and inspiration? That's St John Marie Vianney. That's who the church gives to its priests as their heavenly protector, patron, companion. And so that also becomes part of that resonance. I wanted an image of St John Marie Vianney that would really be broad and embracing and inspiring. And one of the things that resonated with all of this was the way in which St John Marie Vianney tried to inspire people to get to heaven. Heaven was the horizon which he was constantly living his life to and calling his parishioners to. And it's what he's calling all those who entrusted to him as priests to live not trapped in the drudgery of a material existence, but an existence which is infused with the glory of God and which has eternity with God and in God as the horizon against which we are living this life now. What is the struggle all about? What is it that we are reaching out to? What is it that's beginning to take place in us and in one another and the communities that are formed around the Eucharist? It's the reality of heaven breaking through, and one day this will be consummated in the new heaven and the new earth. And the foretaste is something that the priest is being called upon to share with people now. So I wanted to put this figure of the saint in a heavenly context, one that was infused with that optimism and hope and life. And all of it, one image came to mind. It's interesting, the resonance, it's what resonates. And it was an image of a bishop, Saint Apollinaire, in a mosaic to be found in Ravenna. And it's still there today, even though it was made in the 6th century. And the whole piece is about the Transfiguration, but the lower part has the figure of this bishop saint, this pastor, with his arms open, dressed in the vestments of Mass, and with sheep. He's shown as a pastor. And this resonated with me straight away. Now, I resisted it for a while, and I thought, oh, well, I better open my mind and try and look for some other things, and got completely stuck and blocked. And came back to this image, and that's the one that I've worked with. That was the real inspiration. So hearing all of this took me to this image. And from there, I was able to sort of break open a design which would embody a priest, which would be a priestly offering, that would be a pastor, which would be something which articulates the joy and the hope of calling people to heaven.